Welcome to Module 3 of the course. In Module 3, I want to assess some of the notions that go back to the idea of the introduction. We talked about the elements of marketing channels, including things like interdependency, having shared objectives, the notion that there's a connected system, and flexibility, that individual channel members can choose other choices. And we said that marketing channels involved an array of exchange relationships that create customer value in the acquisition, consumption, and disposition of products and services. And we went through some customer value notions having to do with the CRAM module, contextual efficiency, routinization, assortment, and minimizing uncertainty. And in fact, that whole notion of risk is what Module 3 is largely dealing with. When we talk about Module 3, what I want you to start thinking about is how much are you willing to risk in order to achieve customer satisfaction? Am I willing to invest in an ERP system? Every launch or deployment of an ERP system that I'm aware of has ended up costing markedly more than it was set out for in the budget. And what is happening right now? Think about an ERP system that you've invested a lot of money, a lot of training, a lot of upgrading, including hardware, not only software. So now you have a system that can communicate between suppliers and manufacturers. Now once you have this system that can communicate, here comes RFID, and the notion of a virtual tag could essentially replace or supplement your ERP investment. And you have Walmart in January 2005 requiring first-tier suppliers to be RFID ready, being able to accommodate the RFID protocols for Walmart. And in fact, that's a signaling cue in the environment, and one that's going to be an expectation of the seller and an expectation of buyers. So it's kind of a dyadic relationship. Now, these things don't come without a cost. They tend to be extraordinarily expensive, and there's also the psychological cost. Let me give you an example here. At many universities around the United States, there are deployments of ERP systems. At the University of North Texas, for instance, in a system they call EIS, it's basically an ERP deployment, and it means that literally thousands of people, thousands of individuals, customers, and in that hub and spoke system we talked about in Module 2, all those spokes have to be ready, trained, and willing to adapt to this new EIS system, which is basically an ERP as we know it. Well, is it worth it? Well, we could assess the extent to which it's worth it for students, the extent to which it's worth it for administrators, faculty, and all the other providers and constituencies within a university environment. But now let's take that to another level. You're a small supplier and you're in a niche market and you're supplying to a manufacturer. Why do I want to make a $100 million investment in an ERP platform to accommodate a customer? Well, perhaps that customer constitutes such a large proportion of my total revenue stream, I don't have a choice. Now, for most companies, you have to understand it's not just the fact that they're investing in an ERP platform. And I'm only using ERP as an example. It could be RFID or a variety of technologies. It's also the notion of the psychology of getting buy-in across the organization. And in fact, I'm aware of organizations, and I have clients who adopt ERP because they think it's the next best thing. I saw this with Salesforce automation software. Everybody started to buy into Salesforce automation software, and frankly, they didn't know how to use it to make it beneficial. They were going with it because it was kind of like the industry standard, and they wanted to keep up with the industry standards. And we could talk a lot about that. It goes back to the notion of the technology mix. But that's not the point. This is only an example. The real issue or bottom line point is, what am I willing to spend? What is the lifetime value of a customer? What's the lifetime value of a prospect? Having said that, I want to talk about several myths associated with this whole notion of CRM as it applies to the value chain. The biggest myth in all value chain management is that all customers can be good customers. Now, I've alluded to the 80-20 rule before, and you hear this time and again in industry, across industry formats. They say, basically, well, the top 20% provide 80% of my business. I'm convinced that the top 20% of the customers also may cost markedly more than the second 20% of your customers. Why? Because the creme de la creme customers are the ones wanted by all your competitors, whether you're on the supplier side or the manufacturer side, the buyer side or the seller side. The creme de la creme are going to get the greatest attention and cost the most to have a long-term win-win sustainable relationship with. The real key, and I've done this for many companies, is identifying that second layer of customer. That's often a prospect that's willing to grow with you and willing to invest with you as your market grows as well. So it may be in terms of technology, such as an ERP deployment, maybe RFID, it may be a simple communication system, it may be a change in protocol or procedure. So it could be any of these areas, and it could be just a change in how they go about dealing with who within an organization, because we have reorgs that happen all the time within organizations at both the supplier and manufacturer end. Well, at one point we had these product managers that became brand managers, that became sector managers, and this happened a lot downstream. Same thing happens in manufacturing organizations. We have new titles and new organizational structures, and the extent to which buyers and sellers accommodate each organizational structure is part of that. So the first myth is the top 20% of the customers are the best ones to target for long-term customer relationships. I really don't think so. The marketplace agrees with me that the second layer of customer, which may be the bottom 10% and the top 10%, which makes the second 20% of customers, is often the ones that you have the greatest success with in building long-term relationships. The bottom tier customers, although they're desirable of entering into relationships, either don't warrant the volume or margins for that kind of attention, and that's where customer satisficing comes in. You want to retain that customer for volume, but you need to serve that customer at a much lower cost. The second myth that underlies this notion of is the customer worth it is the hassle factor. It's one of the most overlooked things in business-to-business marketing that I've ever confronted in terms of my consultancy. Some customers present a hassle for you. It may be based on a person that you deal with. It may be based on the organizational structure. It may be based on some governance norm that you agreed to accommodate. I'll give you an example. One of my clients came up with a line of products that were repackaged because for volume reasons with one customer. Now, no matter how many times they changed the packaging, within 6 months they were asking for something else. Then they were asking for something more in the cap. Then they were asking for something more in the labeling. It went on and on until finally I said, look, the hassle factor is too high. Now, how do you figure out the hassle factor? It's usually your frontline people who have the most insight into how much hassle factor there is. It's hard to quantify, there's no doubt about it. But hassle factors, I've seen, and I've assisted companies in applying weights to customers in terms of a beta weight on a hassle factor. And basically, it's how much trouble does this customer pose to service? Okay? Is it worth servicing this individual customer? How much more are they going to ask for, and how much are they willing to absorb in terms of cost and, on the flip side, price? So the second myth is this notion that there's all quantifiable benchmarks, because the hassle factor is one that can't be easily quantified. Okay? Even with beta weights. Beta weights are fairly subjective based on frontline persons, or sometimes in the back office. We hear a lot of CFOs and the people in accounting come back and say, it's something to do with how fast they pay or how they go about consummating the transaction that becomes very costly, a paperwork thing that makes the transaction costs get much higher. Another myth is that organizations can only be successful engaging in long-term win-win customer relationships. It's simply not true. There are many examples in volume-driven businesses where revenue streams are best done through transactions and not long-term exchanges. Okay? And the marketplace is replete with these types of examples, but to give you one, we talk a lot about relationship marketing and banking, the applications of relationship marketing. But there are many banks that have successes without engaging in any relationship. They're basically managing transactions more efficiently, more effectively, and customers who are price conscious alleviate fees and want to go with that bottom line service. They're going to manage their own transactions. Happens in financial services industry very often. And the irony or paradox is that they spend a great deal of money promoting this idea that we have a relationship with you. Actually, when you start dissecting, they're really transaction managers. Hospitals, another example. They talk about building relationships, and some hospitals are very good at it. But the vast majority of their customers, it's a matter of processing transactions largely through third-party providers, especially those hospitals who deal with a large percentage of indigent care patients. Okay? So these myths really put into flux the whole notion that, well, the panacea for success is to do customer relationship marketing or management with every customer, supplier, manufacturer in the marketplace. It just isn't true. Thank you.